The quarters scattered across the booth table like accusations. $63 in loose change, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, dumped from what looked like a Crown Royal bag, the purple velvet catching the harsh fluorescent light of Mel's diner. Claire Parker stood with her order pad still in hand, watching the coins settle into an intentional mess between the ketchup bottle and the sugar dispenser. "Count this change correctly," the man in the tailored suit said, not looking up from his phone. His voice carried that particular tone, not quite aggressive, but weighted with the assumption that she would struggle, that she would fumble, that counting money was probably beyond her capabilities. "My associates and I have a bet going." The three other men at the booth chuckled, the sound of expensive scotch and private golf clubs. They were maybe 50, dressed in clothes that cost more than Claire's monthly rent. The kind of men who drove through Millbrook, Pennsylvania, on their way to somewhere more important, and stopped at places like Mel's because the diner was authentic enough to photograph for their social media, but not authentic enough to make them uncomfortable. Claire felt the familiar heat creep up her neck. She'd been working at Mel's for 14 months now, and she'd learned to recognize this game. The small-town diner on Route 22 attracted all types: truckers who left crumpled singles and thanked her genuinely, families with screaming toddlers who apologized for the mess, elderly regulars who called her sweetheart and tipped exactly 15%. But it also attracted men like these, who seemed to need to prove something by diminishing someone they'd never see again. The dinner rush was over. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and the only other occupied table held a young couple nursing coffee and sharing a slice of pie. Mel was in the back, probably smoking his third cigarette of the evening and complaining about the walk-in freezer to nobody in particular. The dishwasher, a kid named Tommy, who was saving for community college, had his earbuds in and wouldn't notice if the building caught fire. "Ma'am!" The man's voice had an edge now. "Is this going to be a problem? Can you handle basic arithmetic?" His friends were grinning openly. One of them, sandy-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, leaned back in the booth with his arms crossed, watching her like she was a circus act. Something cold and sharp settled in Claire's chest. She looked at the pile of change, then at the man's face. He still hadn't looked at her directly. His wedding ring caught the light, platinum or white gold, thick band, probably custom. His watch was a Rolex Submariner. She knew because David had worn one exactly like it. $63.47, Claire said. The man finally looked up. "What?" "The total, $63.47. $12 in quarters, $8.50 in dimes, $4 in nickels, and the rest in pennies." She set her order pad down and reached for the coins, her hands moving with a precision that surprised even her. She hadn't done this in years, but the skill came back like muscle memory: sort, stack, count, calculate. Her fingers moved faster than conscious thought. The booth fell silent, except for the soft clink of metal on formica. Claire separated the coins into neat stacks, quarters in groups of 4, dimes in groups of 10, nickels in groups of 20, pennies in groups of 50. The rhythm was soothing, almost meditative. She'd learned this in another life, in a place where speed and accuracy meant the difference between success and humiliation, where numbers were a language more reliable than words. 42 seconds. That's how long it took her to organize $63.47 in loose change into precise, verifiable stacks. She straightened, meeting the man's eyes for the first time. "Your total for dinner was $58.75. The change covers it with a tip. Thank you, gentlemen. I'll bring your receipt." The man with the Rolex stared at the organized coins, his expression shifting through confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. His friend with the wire-rimmed glasses let out a low whistle. "How did you—" the man started. "MIT," Claire said quietly. The word felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a dead language. "Applied mathematics. Before I came here, I worked in quantitative analysis. You develop certain skills." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked toward the counter, her legs shaking in a way that made her grateful for the ugly orthopedic shoes Mel required. Her apron pocket held her other tips from the evening, maybe $40 total, mostly singles and fives, the kind of money that would buy groceries for 3 days if she was careful. Behind her, she heard the men's voices drop to urgent whispers. She didn't turn around. At the register, Claire's hands trembled as she printed their receipt. Through the window, she could see their rental car, a black Mercedes sedan, dealer plates from Philadelphia. They'd driven 90 minutes to look at a property the sandy-haired man had mentioned. Some investment opportunity in the revitalization of small-town Pennsylvania, he'd said, with the kind of enthusiasm that made her want to throw something. The bell above the door chimed. Claire looked up, expecting the men to leave, but instead the man in the Rolex was walking toward her. He'd left his friends in the booth. "I apologize," he said, and to his credit, he seemed to mean it. His voice was quieter now, stripped of its earlier condescension. "That was inappropriate, disrespectful." Claire nodded but didn't speak. What was there to say? She'd heard apologies before. "They didn't pay rent." "You said MIT?" He was looking at her differently now, trying to reconcile the waitress uniform with the credentials she'd mentioned. "What happened?" The question hit harder than the insult had. What happened? As if her life was a story with a clear inciting incident, a single moment where everything went wrong. As if she could explain in 30 seconds why a woman with a degree from one of the world's best universities was serving meatloaf specials in a Pennsylvania diner. "Life," Claire said simply. "It happens." The man reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "Richard Caldwell. I run a hedge fund in Manhattan. If you're looking for something more suited to your abilities—" "I'm not," Claire interrupted. She didn't take the card. "But thank you." He set it on the counter anyway, next to the napkin dispenser, in case you change your mind. After they left, after the black Mercedes pulled onto Route 22 and disappeared toward the highway, Claire picked up the card. Richard Caldwell, managing partner, Caldwell and Associates, a Manhattan address, a phone number, an email. She held it for a long moment, then dropped it in the trash beneath the register. Mel emerged from the back, smelling like Marlboros and fryer grease. "Everything okay out here?" "Fine," Claire said. He grunted, unconvinced, but didn't press. That was one thing she appreciated about Mel. He didn't ask questions. When she'd walked into his diner 14 months ago with a resume that was mostly lies and desperation in her eyes, he'd given her a uniform and a shift schedule and told her to show up on time. Claire wiped down the booth where the men had sat. The change was gone. They'd taken it with them, probably embarrassed, but they'd left a $100 bill tucked under the salt shaker. Guilt money, she thought, the kind that made them feel better about themselves without actually changing anything. She pocketed it anyway. Her daughter needed new shoes. The rest of the shift passed in the familiar rhythm of routine. She refilled coffee for the couple at table 6, cashed out the evening's receipts, helped Tommy finish the dishes because he had an exam tomorrow and needed to study. At 10:30, she clocked out, changed into her street clothes in the cramped bathroom, and walked out into the October night. The parking lot held 3 cars: Mel's ancient pickup, Tommy's Honda Civic, and her own 2009 Subaru with the duct-taped passenger mirror and the check engine light that had been on for 6 months. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, letting the day settle around her. Her phone screen showed 2 missed calls from her mother and a text from her ex-husband's lawyer. She didn't open either. The drive home took 12 minutes. Millbrook was small enough that everything was 12 minutes away. The diner, the elementary school, the library, the grocery store. She'd chosen it precisely for that reason: anonymity, distance, a place where nobody knew who she'd been or what she'd lost. Her apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian, the kind of building that advertised charming character, but meant inadequate heating and sloping floors. Claire unlocked the door quietly, trying not to wake her daughter. "Mom." Emma's voice came from the living room. She was supposed to be asleep. Claire found her daughter curled up on the couch, wrapped in the Afghan Claire's grandmother had made decades ago. Emma was 9, all elbows and knees and dark hair that refused to stay braided. She'd been reading. A book about marine biology lay open across her lap. "Hey, baby, what are you still doing up?" "Grandma called. She said it's important." Claire's stomach tightened. Her mother only used the word important for specific things: hospital bills, lawyer fees, her father's memory getting worse. "I'll call her back tomorrow," Claire said. "Come on, bedtime." As she tucked Emma in, the routine of blankets and stuffed animals and one more glass of water, Claire thought about Richard Caldwell's business card in the trash. She thought about MIT, about the girl she'd been at 22, brilliant and arrogant and certain the world would arrange itself around her talents. She thought about the office in Boston where she'd worked after graduation, the salary that had made her parents cry with pride, the future that had seemed inevitable. She thought about David, always David. "Mum?" Emma's voice was sleepy. "Did something happen at work?" Claire smoothed her daughter's hair. "Nothing bad, just an interesting night." "Tell me." So Claire told her about the change, about counting it faster than the man expected. She left out the humiliation, the condescension, the way it had felt to be tested like a performing animal. She made it a story about surprise, about showing someone that assumptions can be wrong. Emma smiled, already half asleep. "You're really smart, Mom. So are you, baby." After Emma drifted off, Claire sat in the dark living room with her laptop, the one she'd bought refurbished 3 years ago and babied like it was made of glass. She opened her email for the first time in a week. 3 messages from her mother, one from her ex-husband's lawyer about modifying the custody arrangement, one from a debt collector about her father's medical bills, and one sent at 9:47 p.m. from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Regarding our conversation at Mel's Diner." Claire's finger hovered over the delete button. She should delete it. She should forget the whole night, cash the $100 tip, and move on with the life she'd built from the wreckage of her old one. Instead, she clicked. The email was short. "Ms. Parker, I apologize again for my behavior this evening. After our conversation, I looked you up. Your work at Mercer Analytics was exceptional. Your paper on algorithmic trading optimization is still cited regularly in our industry. I understand you may have your reasons for stepping away, but if you're interested in consulting work, something flexible, remote, that might fit your current circumstances, I'd like to discuss possibilities. The offer stands. No pressure, no obligation. Richard Caldwell." Claire read it 3 times. He'd looked her up, found her old life, her old work. The papers she'd published, when she still believed intelligence and education could protect you from disaster. She closed the laptop without responding, but she didn't delete the email. Outside, Millbrook was quiet, except for the distant sound of a train passing through on its way to Pittsburgh. Claire sat in the dark, listening to her daughter breathe in the next room, and thought about change, the kind you count and the kind you can't. Claire woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. The bedroom was still dark, the October dawn hours away. She fumbled for the phone, her heart already racing with the particular anxiety that came from calls before sunrise. Her mother's name glowed on the screen. "Mom," Claire's voice was rough with sleep, "your father's in the hospital again. No preamble, no good morning. Patricia Parker had never been one for gentle deliveries. Presbyterian, same as last time. They're saying it's pneumonia, but the doctor wants to run tests. The neurologist thinks the Alzheimer's might be progressing faster than we thought. Claire sat up, the cold air hitting her like a slap. Through the thin wall, she could hear the neighbor's alarm clock, the morning routine of a different life beginning. When did he go in? Yesterday afternoon. I didn't want to worry you during your shift. Her mother's voice had that tight quality that meant she'd been crying but wouldn't admit it. They're saying he needs round-the-clock care now. The Medicare won't cover everything. The social worker gave me papers about facilities, but Claire, the cost... How much? The pause told her everything. $7,000 a month. That's the cheapest option within 50 miles that takes Alzheimer's patients. Claire did the math automatically, the way she couldn't help doing. 7,000 times 12 was 84,000 a year. Her father's pension was maybe 30,000. Social Security, another 20. That left a gap of 34,000, not counting medications, not counting emergencies, not counting the inevitable deterioration that would require even more expensive care. I'll figure something out, Claire said. Honey, you're already... Her mother stopped. They both knew the reality. Claire sent what she could every month, usually $200 or $300, that meant choosing between groceries and fixing the Subaru, between Emma's field trip and her own dental work. I'll figure something out, Claire repeated. And the conversation ended the way these conversations always did, with promises neither of them quite believed, and love that couldn't bridge the gap between need and resources. After hanging up, Claire lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, watching the cracks in the plaster catch the faint light from the street. The apartment was quiet, except for the hiss of the old radiator struggling to heat. She thought about Richard Caldwell's email, still undeleted in her inbox. She thought about $7,000 a month. At 6:30, she got up and made coffee in the ancient percolator she'd bought at a yard sale. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person, a narrow galley with counters that didn't quite line up and cabinet doors that hung crooked. But it was clean. Claire had always maintained that. No matter how bad things got, she kept the apartment clean. Emma appeared at 7:15, already dressed for school in jeans and a sweatshirt that was getting too small. She was growing so fast that Claire couldn't keep up. Every few months, another expense, new shoes, new pants, new winter coat. Children didn't pause for poverty. Grandma called last night, Emma said, pouring herself cereal. Is Grandpa okay? Claire measured her words carefully. Emma was 9, old enough to know the truth but young enough to be protected from its full weight. He's in the hospital, but the doctors are taking care of him. Grandma's with him. Can we visit? Maybe this weekend. Another promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Her mother lived in Columbus, Ohio, a 4-hour drive. Claire's Subaru needed inspection, needed new brakes, needed about 6 other things a mechanic had listed the last time she'd had the money to ask. Taking it on an 8-hour round trip felt like tempting fate. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the morning routine familiar and grounding. Claire packed Emma's lunch, peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, the good granola bars she bought in bulk when they were on sale. She watched her daughter eat and thought about the future, about 4th grade and 5th grade and middle school and college, about the life Emma deserved and the life Claire could actually provide. The school bus came at 8:05. Claire walked Emma to the corner, the way she did every morning, and waved until the bus turned onto Main Street and disappeared. Then she walked back to the apartment, cleaned the breakfast dishes and opened her laptop. Richard Caldwell's email was still there. Claire stared at it for a long time. Then she opened a new browser tab and did something she hadn't done in 14 months. She looked herself up. The search results were sparse. Her LinkedIn profile, outdated and abandoned. A few mentions in academic papers from her MIT days, an old faculty page from when she'd done a guest lecture at Penn State, and 3 news articles from 2010, each one a small explosion of her old life. Analyst at Mercer Analytics under investigation in trading scandal. Former MIT prodigy implicated in high-frequency trading fraud. Claire Parker testifies against husband in federal case. She closed the browser before reading more. She knew what they said. She'd lived it. The prosecution had taken 2 years. David had been so confident at the beginning, so certain that his lawyers could make it disappear. He'd told her not to worry, that the SEC didn't understand how algorithmic trading worked, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. He'd told her she was brilliant and beautiful and everything would be fine. He'd lied about all of it. The algorithms were fraudulent. The trades were manipulated. The profits, the money that had bought their brownstone in Back Bay, that had paid for the honeymoon in Tuscany, that had filled their accounts with the kind of wealth Claire had never imagined, all of it was built on code that David had written to cheat. And he'd used her research to do it. Claire had been 26 when she married David Chen, 27 when she'd published the paper on trading optimization that had gotten her noticed in quantitative finance circles, 28 when she'd realized her brilliant husband was a criminal and her own work had been weaponized. The prosecution had offered her immunity if she testified. Her lawyer had explained it carefully. She could cooperate and face no charges, or she could stay silent and potentially face conspiracy charges herself. They had evidence that David had used her research. They had emails with her name in them, code that referenced her algorithms. The prosecutor had been kind but firm. She was either a witness or a defendant. She'd chosen to testify. David had gotten 7 years. He was in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, eligible for parole in 2026. She hadn't spoken to him since the sentencing, except through lawyers about custody arrangements for Emma, who visited him once a month in a visiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. After the trial, Claire's name was toxic. No hedge fund would hire her. No trading firm would return her calls. The whispers followed her. She'd betrayed her husband. She'd saved herself. She couldn't be trusted. Never mind that she'd been cleared of wrongdoing. Never mind that she'd cooperated with federal prosecutors. In the insular world of high finance, loyalty meant more than legality. She'd tried for a year to find work in her field. She'd applied to universities, consulting firms, analytics companies. Nothing. The best she'd gotten was a part-time position teaching calculus at a community college in New Jersey, which had dissolved when the school lost funding. By then, Emma was 6 and needed stability more than Claire needed pride. So she'd packed what they could fit in the Subaru, driven until she found a town small enough that nobody recognized her name, and taken the first job that would have her. Mel's Diner wasn't a failure, it was survival, but $7,000 a month, that required more than survival. Claire opened a new email and started typing before she could talk herself out of it. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for your message. I appreciate your consideration. I would be interested in discussing consulting opportunities, with the understanding that any arrangement would need to be flexible and remote. I have family obligations that require me to remain in my current location. I'm available to speak this week at your convenience. Best regards, Claire Parker. She hit send before she could second-guess the wording, the tone, the decision itself. Her shift at Mel's started at 11:00. She had 2 hours to fill. Claire spent them doing what she'd been avoiding for months, going through the stack of bills and past due notices that lived in a folder in her desk drawer. Her father's medical expenses, the letter from Emma's school about overdue lunch account fees, the notice from her landlord about the rent increase that would take effect in January, $50 more a month, which might as well have been $500. She made a spreadsheet, the way she used to make them at Mercer Analytics, tracking every expense against her income. The waitressing brought in about $1,900 a month after taxes. Rent was $750. Utilities, another $150. Food, gas, Emma's needs. It all added up to more than $1,900. She'd been running a deficit for over a year, burning through the last of her savings like they were kindling. The severance from Mercer had lasted longer than she'd expected, but it was gone now. Everything was gone except the Subaru and the furniture and the ruthless mathematics of poverty. Her phone buzzed, an email notification. Richard Caldwell had responded in under an hour. "Ms. Parker? Excellent. Are you available for a call this afternoon? I'm free after 2:00 EST. Best, R.C. Claire confirmed the time, then sat staring at her phone like it might detonate. She'd sworn she was done with that world, done with the pressure and the politics and the constant measurement of worth in terms of algorithms and profit margins. She'd told herself that waitressing was honest work, that there was dignity in service, that Emma was better off with a mother who was present even if she was broke. But her father needed care, Emma needed shoes, and Claire needed something more than the grinding poverty that had become her life. At 10:45, she drove to Mel's. The morning was grey and cold, the kind of Pennsylvania autumn that promised early winter. The diner was already busy with the lunch crowd. Contractors in work boots, retirees nursing coffee, a table of women from the Methodist Church planning some charity event. Mel was at the grill, flipping burgers with the precision of someone who'd done this for 40 years. He nodded at Claire when she came in, his version of a greeting. "Table 6 wants the special," he said. "Tell them the soup's potato and the pie's cherry." Claire tied on her apron and fell into the rhythm. Orders and coffee refills and cleaning tables between seatings. It was mindless work, which was both its curse and its blessing. Her hands knew what to do, which left her mind free to wander. She thought about the call she'd have with Richard Caldwell in 3 hours. What would he ask? What could she offer after being out of the industry for so long? Her skills were outdated. The field had evolved. New technologies had emerged. Her knowledge was calcified in 2010, but mathematics didn't change. Logic didn't change. The fundamental principles she'd learned at MIT, the way she saw patterns in numbers, the intuitive understanding of probability and risk, those were still there, muscle memory of a different kind. At 1:45, she told Mel she needed a break. He grunted permission, and she went out to her car, parked in the back lot next to the dumpster. She sat in the driver's seat with her phone, waiting. At exactly 2:00, it rang. "Miss Parker? Richard Caldwell." His voice was different on the phone, professional, clipped, efficient. The apologetic man from the diner was gone, replaced by someone who made decisions quickly and expected others to keep up. "Thank you for calling," Claire said. "I'll be direct. My firm specializes in risk assessment for commercial real estate investments. We're expanding into secondary markets, smaller cities, emerging development opportunities. We need someone who can build predictive models for property values, demographic trends, economic indicators. Someone who understands both the mathematics and the real-world variables." Claire listened, her mind already racing ahead to the methodology, the data sets, the challenges of modeling economic behavior in unstable markets. "The work would be project-based," Caldwell continued. "You'd analyze specific properties or markets we're considering, provide written assessments and risk profiles. Everything can be done remotely. You'd need access to certain databases and software, which we'd provide." "What's the time commitment?" "Flexible. Some weeks might be heavy, others minimal. We'd agree on deadlines for each project. I'd estimate 15 to 20 hours a week on average." "And compensation?" "We'd start with a 3-month trial, $75 an hour, paid monthly. If the work is satisfactory, we'd discuss a longer-term arrangement." Claire did the math. 20 hours a week at $75 was $1,500 a week, $6,000 a month, more than triple what she made at the diner. Enough to cover her father's care and keep the lights on and maybe possibly start breathing again. When would you need an answer? Today, ideally. We have 3 properties in Pennsylvania I'd like you to evaluate, 1 in Scranton, 1 in Erie, 1 in Allentown. I'd need preliminary reports within 2 weeks. Today, of course it was today. Men like Richard Caldwell didn't wait for deliberation. They made offers and expected immediate responses and moved on if you hesitated. I accept, Claire said. Excellent. I'll have my assistant send over the contracts and NDAs. You'll need to review and sign them, then we'll set you up with system access. Can you start this week? Yes. They talked for another 10 minutes about logistics, software, data access, communication protocols. Caldwell was all business, efficient and impersonal. When he hung up, Claire sat in her car for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision settle around her. She'd just agreed to step back into the world that had destroyed her life. But she'd also just found a way to save her father. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She moved through the motions, orders, tables, tips, but her mind was elsewhere, already thinking about risk models and property valuations and the work that would consume her nights and weekends. At 9:00 she clocked out and drove home. Emma was at the neighbor's apartment doing homework with Mrs. Chen's daughter. Claire picked her up, made dinner, supervised bath time and reading, all while her phone sat on the counter, waiting for the email from Caldwell's assistant. It came at 10:47 p.m. A message with 6 attachments: contract, NDA, software license agreement, data access forms, and 2 others she was too tired to identify. Claire opened the contract and started reading. The language was dense, legal, specific. It outlined payment terms, confidentiality requirements, intellectual property rights, termination conditions, standard corporate boilerplate, except for one clause that made her stomach tighten. Consultant agrees to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, including but not limited to prior employment in related fields, ongoing legal obligations, or personal relationships that might affect objectivity. She would have to tell them about David, about Mercer, about the trial, or she could stay silent and hope they never found out. Claire closed the laptop without signing. She sat in the dark living room, listening to the radiator hiss and Emma's soft breathing from the bedroom, and thought about honesty and necessity and the price of survival. Tomorrow she would sign the contracts. Tomorrow she would become someone who consults on real estate investments while serving meatloaf specials. Tomorrow she would try to be both versions of herself and hope they didn't destroy each other. But tonight she allowed herself one moment of pure, selfish relief. For the first time in 14 months, she could pay her bills. The first 2 weeks of consulting work consumed Claire in ways she hadn't anticipated. The properties Caldwell wanted evaluated: a mixed-use development in Scranton, a waterfront renovation in Erie, a downtown revitalization project in Allentown, required research that bled into every spare hour. After Emma went to bed, Claire would open her laptop and disappear into census data, zoning records, economic forecasts and property histories until her eyes burned and her coffee went cold. The work itself was intoxicating. She'd forgotten how it felt to use her mind this way, to see patterns emerge from chaos, to build models that could predict human behavior through mathematics. The Scranton property was particularly complex. A former textile mill being converted into apartments and retail space in a neighborhood that was either on the verge of gentrification or permanent decline, depending on how you weighted the variables. Claire spent 3 nights building a multi-factor model that considered unemployment trends, median household income trajectories, comparable property values, school quality ratings, and crime statistics. She factored in the proximity to the university, the highway access, the pending state infrastructure investments. By the time she finished, she had a 90-page report with 17 different scenarios and a recommendation so specific that it surprised even her. Invest. But delay closing until the City Council voted on the new zoning regulations in January, then negotiate down by 8% based on the infrastructure timeline. Caldwell's response came 12 hours after she submitted it. Exceptional work. This is exactly what we needed. The Scranton developers are already confirming your infrastructure timeline. How soon can you have Erie ready? Claire read the email 3 times, feeling something she barely recognized. Pride, professional validation, the knowledge that her skills hadn't atrophied, that she was still capable of work that mattered. But the validation came with a cost. At Mel's, she was making mistakes. Small ones at first, forgetting orders, bringing wrong sides, losing track of table numbers. Mel noticed but didn't comment, just fixed her errors with his usual gruff efficiency. But on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks into the consulting work, she poured coffee into a customer's water glass, didn't notice until the man pointed it out, and stood there staring at the mess like she'd forgotten how physics worked. Claire. Mel's voice was quiet. Back room. Now. She followed him past the kitchen into the cramped office that smelled like cigarettes and old receipts. Mel closed the door and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. You sick? No. You on something? No, Mel, Jesus. Then what's going on? Because you've been somewhere else for weeks and I need you here. Claire wanted to explain about her father, about the consulting work, about the impossible mathematics of trying to be 2 people in 2 different worlds, but Mel didn't know about MIT or Mercer or any of it. To him, she was just Claire, the waitress who showed up on time and worked hard and didn't complain. Family stuff, she said finally. My dad's sick. I'm just distracted. Mel's expression softened slightly. That the same dad you send money to every month? She nodded. Look, I get it, family's important, but you're making mistakes that could cost me customers. I like you, Claire. You're good at this, but I can't carry you if you're not present. I understand. Do you? Because I've got 3 applications sitting on my desk from people who want this job. I'm trying to be patient here. I know. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Mel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, get back out there. That night, after her shift ended, Claire sat in her car and cried for the first time in months. Not the quiet, controlled tears she allowed herself sometimes, but deep, gasping sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose in her chest. She was failing at everything, failing Emma by working too much, failing her father by not earning enough, failing Mel by being distracted, failing the consulting work by not having enough time. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Your father doesn't remember my name today. The doctor says we need to decide about the facility soon. Claire drove home in a fog. The apartment was dark. Emma was sleeping over at a friend's house. One of the rare Friday nights when Claire had planned to catch up on sleep. Instead, she opened her laptop and started working on the Erie report. By 2:00 a.m., she'd analyzed 3 years of waterfront property trends and built a comparative model using data from similar cities, Cleveland, Buffalo, Rochester. The pattern was clear. These revitalization projects looked promising on paper, but often failed, because developers underestimated the time required for market perception to change. People had long memories about neighborhoods. No amount of renovation could erase decades of decline quickly enough to justify the investment timelines. She was writing the executive summary when her email pinged. Richard Caldwell sent at 2:13 a.m. Are you awake? Claire stared at the message. It was highly unusual. They communicated during business hours, kept things professional and distant. She hesitated, then replied, yes, working on Erie. His response was immediate. Can we talk? I have something time-sensitive. Her phone rang before she could answer. She picked up, her heart rate accelerating for reasons she didn't quite understand. Claire. Caldwell's voice was different, less formal, rougher around the edges. Sorry for calling so late, or early, whatever this is. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I have an opportunity. A development group in Pittsburgh is looking for a risk analyst for a major project. $40 million mixed-use development in the Strip District. They need someone fast, someone brilliant, someone who can start immediately. I recommended you. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. I'm not looking for full-time work. I know, that's why I waited to call. But Claire, they're offering $140,000 a year. Full benefits, the position is senior level. You'd be making real decisions, not just writing reports. $140,000. The number hung in the air between them like a dare. I can't, Claire said. I have obligations here. In Millbrook, what obligations? You're working at a diner. The dismissal in his voice stung. I have a daughter. She's in school. We have a life here. Pittsburgh is 90 minutes away. You could commute or relocate. The salary would more than cover it. Claire, this is your field. This is what you're trained for. Don't you want what? She was standing now, pacing the small living room. Want to move my daughter again? Want to uproot the first stable thing she's had in years? Want to step back into an industry that destroyed my career once already? Silence. Then, I didn't know about that. Didn't you? Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. You looked me up before you emailed me. You said so yourself. I saw your work at Mercer. I saw the publications. I didn't dig deeper. Well, dig now. Google Claire Parker Mercer Analytics. You'll find everything you need to know about why I'm serving meatloaf in Pennsylvania instead of working in Manhattan. She could hear him typing, the soft click of keys. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, 40, a minute. Jesus, he said finally, you testified against your own husband. Ex-husband. The charges against you were dropped. You cooperated with federal prosecutors. You did the right thing. The right thing cost me my career. But you were cleared. You were a witness, not a defendant. You think that matters? Try explaining that in a job interview. Try watching someone's face when they realize you're that Claire Parker, the one who married a fraudster, the one who might be smart but can't be trusted. That's not... Don't. Claire's voice was sharp. Don't tell me what it is or isn't. You haven't lived it. Another silence. When Caldwell spoke again, his voice was quieter. You're right. I'm sorry. But for what it's worth, I don't care about any of that. Your work for me has been exceptional. The people in Pittsburgh would be lucky to have you. It doesn't matter. Why not? Because I can't go back to that life. I can't be that person anymore. I spent 5 years being brilliant and ambitious and believing that success would protect me from disaster. And you know what I learned? It doesn't. It makes the fall harder. So you'd rather stay at Mel's diner forever? That's your plan? Claire felt anger flare, hot and sharp. I'd rather be there for my daughter than chase a job that will consume me. I'd rather be stable than successful. And I'd rather you respect my decision than tell me what I should want. She hung up before he could respond. The apartment felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. Claire walked to the window and looked out at Millbrook's empty main street. The closed storefronts and darkened traffic light, and the kind of stillness that only existed in small towns at 3:00 a.m., $140,000. She could pay her father's medical bills. She could buy Emma a winter coat that fit. She could fix the Subaru, pay off the credit cards, maybe even save something for the future. But at what cost? She thought about the months after David's arrest, when work had been her only anchor. 90-hour weeks, endless spreadsheets, models and projections and risk assessments that had let her ignore the reality of her imploding marriage. She'd told herself she was being strong, being professional. Really, she'd been hiding. The consulting work was different, she'd told herself. Controlled, manageable. But already it was bleeding into everything. Already she was distracted at the diner, short-tempered with Emma, spending her nights staring at data instead of sleeping. A full-time job in Pittsburgh would be 10 times worse. Her phone buzzed. A text from Caldwell. "I apologize. That was inappropriate. Your choices are your own." Claire didn't respond. The next morning, she woke up to find Emma standing in her bedroom doorway, still in her pajamas from the sleepover. "Mom, are you okay? Mrs. Patterson said you were up really late." Claire forced a smile. "I'm fine, baby. Just had some work to do." Work or diner work? The question was more perceptive than it should have been. Claire had tried to keep the consulting separate, to maintain the fiction that her life was simple and stable. But Emma noticed everything. "Both," Claire admitted. Emma climbed onto the bed, curling up next to her mother, the way she used to when she was smaller. "Do you miss your old job? The one before the diner?" "Sometimes, but I like being here with you more." "Is that true? Or are you just saying that?" Claire looked at her daughter, 9 years old, and already too smart, too observant, too aware of the compromises adults made, and called them choices. "It's complicated," Claire said finally. "There are things I miss about that work, but there are things about this life that matter more." "Like what?" "Like being home for dinner, like knowing your teachers, like not missing your school concerts because I'm stuck in some office in Manhattan." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad missed a lot of stuff when he was working." "Yeah, he did." "Do you think that's why he did the bad things? Because he was always trying to make more money?" The question hit harder than it should have. Claire had spent years trying to understand David's choices, trying to find some psychological explanation that made sense. Greed seemed too simple. Ambition seemed too noble. In the end, she'd settled on a different answer. He'd believed he was smarter than everyone else, and that belief had made him reckless. "I think your dad made choices that seemed right to him at the time," Claire said carefully. "But they weren't, and he's paying for them now." "Are you making good choices?" Claire pulled her daughter closer. "I'm trying, baby. I'm really trying." That afternoon, Claire called her mother. The conversation was short and painful. Her father was being moved to a memory care facility the following week. The cost was $7,200 a month. Medicare would cover some, but not enough. Patricia was applying for Medicaid, but the process would take months. "I can send more," Claire said. "Honey, you're already—" "I got some extra work, consulting. I can probably manage another $1,000 a month." The relief in her mother's voice was palpable. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." After hanging up, Claire opened her laptop and did the math. With the consulting income and the diner salary, she could send her mother $1,000 a month and still cover her own expenses. Barely. It meant no savings, no emergency fund, no room for error. But it was possible. She just had to keep both jobs, keep both lives running parallel, and hope they never collided. That evening, she went to work at Mel's with a new resolve. She would be present, focused, perfect. No more mistakes. For 3 hours, it worked. Then Richard Caldwell walked through the door. He was alone this time, no entourage of business associates. He sat in a booth by the window and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Claire walked over with her order pad, her heart pounding. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice professionally neutral. "Coffee, and whatever's good." "Everything's good. This is a diner." A small smile. "Surprise me then." She brought him the meatloaf special, the same thing his group had ordered weeks ago. He ate slowly, glancing at her occasionally when she passed to refill other customers' drinks. The diner was busy. Friday night rush, families out for dinner, teenagers crowding into booths. Normal. Safe. When she brought Caldwell's check, he looked up at her. "Can we talk? After your shift?" "I don't think that's a good idea. 5 minutes, please." Against her better judgment, Claire agreed. At 9:30, after clocking out, she found him waiting by his car in the parking lot. The Mercedes was gone. Tonight he drove a Tesla, black and sleek and completely out of place next to the pickup trucks and aging sedans. "I spoke with the Pittsburgh developers," Caldwell said without preamble. "Told them you declined. They were disappointed." "Okay. I also told them you were one of the best analysts I'd ever worked with, and that if they had smaller projects, consulting opportunities, you might be interested." Claire shook her head. "Richard, let me finish. They have a property in McKees Rocks they want evaluated. Small project, 15 million instead of 40. 3 weeks of work, remote. $8,000. Interested?" "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're talented. Because you deserve better than serving meatloaf to people who don't appreciate you. Because I was an asshole that first night, and I'm trying to make up for it. I don't need you to save me." "I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to hire you. There's a difference." Claire looked at him, really looked. He was maybe 55, graying at the temples, tired around the eyes. There was something in his expression that reminded her of herself, a kind of resignation mixed with determination. "Why do you care?" she asked. "Honestly? I don't know. Maybe because my daughter's your age, and she's working 3 jobs to pay off law school debt, and I see her grinding herself down. Maybe because I recognize what it looks like when someone's drowning, but too proud to ask for help. I'm not drowning." "No," he agreed. "You're treading water, very competently, but you could be swimming." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Around them, Millbrook continued its quiet Friday evening, cars passing on Route 22, the distant sound of the high school football game, the smell of late autumn in the air. "Send me the details about McKees Rocks," she said finally. "I'll look at it." "Thank you." As he drove away, Claire stood in the parking lot and wondered what she'd just agreed to. More work, more pressure, more of the constant juggling act that was slowly fracturing her into pieces, but also $8,000, almost enough to cover her father's care for a month, almost enough to breathe. She drove home through the dark and tried not to think about how much further she could stretch before something broke. The McKees Rocks project was supposed to take 3 weeks. It took 5, not because the work was complex, but because Claire kept digging deeper, finding layers of risk the developers hadn't considered. The property was a former steel mill being converted into a tech hub, trendy, optimistic, doomed. The market analysis looked promising on the surface, but when Claire examined the regional employment trends, the education demographics, the venture capital investment patterns, she saw a different story. Pittsburgh's tech sector was growing, but slowly. The really talented developers were leaving for Silicon Valley, Austin, Boston. The ones who stayed were good, but not exceptional, and they already had established employers. Building a speculative tech hub in an industrial neighborhood 15 minutes from downtown wasn't innovation. It was wishful thinking dressed up as market opportunity. Claire's report was brutal. She recommended against the investment, provided 12 different data points to support her position, and suggested 3 alternative properties that showed better long-term potential. The developers were furious. Caldwell called her at 10:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're accusing me of hiring someone incompetent. They're threatening to pull all their business from our firm." "Did you read my report?" "Of course I read it. It's devastating." "Is it wrong?" A pause. "No. It's probably the most thorough risk assessment I've ever seen. But Claire, you have to understand the politics here. These aren't just numbers on a page. These are relationships, partnerships, deals that took months to build." "So you want me to lie?" "I want you to be diplomatic, to soften the edges, to present the same information in a way that doesn't make them feel like idiots. Claire felt something cold settle in her chest. I did that once. Softened the edges, made my husband's risky trade sound reasonable, helped dress up fraud as innovation. It destroyed my career and put him in federal prison. I'm not doing it again. This isn't fraud. This is just bad analysis masquerading as opportunity. Different scale, same principle. If they invest in McKee's rocks based on wishful thinking instead of data, they'll lose money. Maybe not immediately, but within 3 to 5 years. I won't be part of that. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Claire thought he'd hung up. Then Caldwell sighed, a sound like air escaping from something punctured. "You're right," he said. "God help me, you're right. I'll handle the developers. But Claire, this might be the last project I can send you. They're influential, and if they blacklist you..." "I understand." After he hung up, Claire sat at her kitchen table staring at her laptop screen. The McKee's Rocks report glowed in the darkness. $8,000 worth of work that had probably just ended her consulting career before it really began. She should have been devastated. Instead, she felt oddly calm. The next morning, Emma came down with the flu. The real kind, not the 24-hour stomach bug, but the full respiratory nightmare that kept her home from school for a week. Claire called in sick to Mel's for 3 consecutive shifts, spent her days holding a bucket while Emma vomited, monitoring her fever, making soup that went uneaten. On the 4th day, Mel called. "I need you to come in," he said without preamble. "We're short-staffed. My daughter's sick, I understand. But I've got one waitress out with car trouble and another who just quit. I need bodies on the floor. Mel, she's 9. I can't leave her alone." "Then bring her. Set her up in the office with some movies or something. But Claire, I need you here. Otherwise, I have to start making decisions about staffing." The threat was clear. Claire closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pressure of impossible choices. "I'll see what I can do." She called her mother, but Patricia was in Ohio with Claire's father, dealing with the facility transition. She called the neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who helped sometimes, but Mrs. Chen's daughter had the flu too. She called the mother of Emma's best friend, but they were out of town. In the end, she did what Mel suggested. She bundled Emma in blankets, set her up in the diner's cramped office with pillows and a tablet streaming movies, and worked a 6-hour shift while checking on her daughter every 15 minutes. It was one of the worst days of Claire's life. Emma was miserable, feverish and nauseous and wanting her mother, not occasional 5-minute visits between orders. The guilt was crushing. Claire moved through her tables like an automaton, bringing food and clearing plates and smiling at customers, while her daughter lay in a back office feeling abandoned. At one point, she found Emma crying quietly in the office, the tablet abandoned on the floor. "I want to go home," Emma whispered. "I know, baby. Just a little longer. You said you'd be different from Dad. You said you wouldn't always be working." The words hit like a physical blow. Claire knelt beside her daughter, smoothed her sweat-dampened hair, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry, this isn't okay." She went to Mel and quit on the spot. No 2 weeks' notice. No explanation beyond, "I need to be with my daughter." He tried to argue, but Claire was already untying her apron, already carrying Emma out to the Subaru, already driving home through the afternoon light. That night, after Emma fell asleep with her fever finally breaking, Claire sat in the dark living room and faced reality. Without the diner income, she had maybe $800 in her checking account and the $8,000 from the McKee's Rocks project. That was it. No consulting work on the horizon, no job prospects, no safety net. She had about 6 weeks before she'd be unable to pay rent. For the first time since leaving Boston, Claire allowed herself to feel the full weight of her fear. Not the manageable daily anxiety of being broke, but the existential terror of actual destitution, of not being able to feed her daughter, of losing the apartment, of the complete collapse of the fragile stability she'd built. Her phone buzzed. An email from Richard Caldwell, sent at 11:47 p.m. Claire, the Pittsburgh developers came around. After cooling off, they realized you were right. They're pulling the McKees Rocks investment and looking at your alternative properties instead. More importantly, they were so impressed with your analysis that they want to hire you, not as a consultant, as their chief risk analyst. Full-time, $165K base plus bonus, full benefits. They said to tell you they need someone who'll tell them the truth even when it's inconvenient. The job is yours if you want it. R.C. Claire read the email 3 times. $165,000, health insurance, dental, vision, a retirement account, stability. All she had to do was move to Pittsburgh, uproot Emma again, commute 90 minutes each way, or relocate to a city where she knew no one. Step back into the world of high-stakes finance, where one mistake could ruin everything. She stared at the screen until the words blurred. The next morning, she woke Emma early. Her fever was gone, replaced by the listless exhaustion of recovery. "How do you feel about an adventure?" Claire asked. Emma looked suspicious. "What kind of adventure?" "The kind where we talk about important decisions. Get dressed. I'm taking you somewhere." They drove to Pittsburgh, 90 minutes through the Pennsylvania hills, turning gold with late autumn. Claire had called ahead, arranged a tour of the development company's office, told them she was bringing her daughter because childcare was a factor in her decision. The office was in the Strip District, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and high ceilings and the kind of trendy aesthetic that screamed creative professional space. The developers, 3 partners, all men, all wearing the tech industry uniform of jeans and expensive casual shirts, were surprisingly welcoming. "We want you to know this is family-friendly," one of them said, a guy named Marcus who had kind eyes. "We have 2 employees with young kids. Flexible hours, work from home when you need it. We care about results, not FaceTime." Emma sat through the tour quietly, observing everything with her 2 smart 9-year-old eyes. Afterward, Claire took her to lunch at a restaurant overlooking the Allegheny River. "What do you think?" Claire asked. "It's okay. Different from Millbrook. Would you be okay living here, making new friends, going to a new school?" Emma was quiet for a long time, pushing pasta around her plate. "Are you going to be happier?" The question caught Claire off guard. "What do you mean?" "You've been sad. Not all the time, but a lot. Like you're worried about everything, and when you do the computer work at night, you seem more like yourself, less worried." Claire felt her throat tighten. "I didn't know you noticed." "I notice everything, Mom. That's what you always tell me." "You're right. I do say that. So, would you be happier with this job?" Claire thought about it honestly. Would she be happier? The work would be challenging, fulfilling, the kind of problem-solving that made her feel competent and valuable. But it would also mean long hours, high pressure, the constant performance of professional excellence. "I think I'd be less worried about money," Claire said finally, "which would help. But happy is more complicated." "Okay, then let's try it." "Are you sure?" Emma nodded. "Grandpa needs help. You need to not be worried. And I can make new friends. It's okay." Claire reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "You're pretty amazing, you know that. I learned from you." They drove back to Millbrook in the late afternoon light. Claire called Richard Caldwell and accepted the position with a start date in 3 weeks, time enough to give notice at the apartment, enroll Emma in her new school, pack their life into boxes again. That evening, she drove to Mel's. The dinner rush was in full swing, the diner packed with familiar faces. She found Mel at the grill, his usual position. "I need to apologize," she said. He glanced at her, flipped a burger, said nothing. "I shouldn't have quit like that. You deserved better." "You're damn right I did. I got a job offer in Pittsburgh, good money, something in my field. We're moving." Mel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. You were too smart for this place anyway. This place saved me, Mel. When nobody else would hire me, you did. I won't forget that." His expression softened slightly. "You worked hard, showed up. That's all I ask." He paused, then, "Your kid doing better?" "Yeah, she's tough." "Like her mom," Claire smiled. "I hope so." They shook hands, an oddly formal gesture in the chaos of the dinner rush. Then Claire left, walking out of Mel's diner for the last time as an employee. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of logistics. Claire found an apartment in Pittsburgh's Shadyside neighborhood, 2 bedrooms, more expensive than Millbrook, but manageable with her new salary. She enrolled Emma in a public elementary school with good ratings and an after-school program. She sold most of their furniture, packed the essentials, said goodbye to Mrs. Chen and the few other people in Millbrook who'd become part of their routine. On her last night in the apartment after Emma was asleep, Claire sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and allowed herself to feel the full complexity of the moment. Pride and fear and hope and exhaustion all tangled together. She thought about the girl she'd been at MIT, brilliant and arrogant and certain the world would reward her intelligence. She thought about the woman she'd become at Mercer, successful and blind to the corruption happening around her. She thought about the version of herself who'd testified against David, who'd chosen honesty over loyalty and paid for it with everything. And she thought about the woman she was now, a single mother with a scarred career and a second chance, trying to balance ambition with stability, success with presence. She still didn't know if she could do it, but for the first time in years, she believed it was possible. The first day at the development company was terrifying. Claire showed up in professional clothes she'd bought at a consignment store, carrying a laptop bag and a folder of notes, and the kind of nervous energy that made her hands shake. Marcus met her at the door, gave her a tour, introduced her to the team. They were younger than she expected, most in their late 20s or early 30s, smart and eager and completely unaware of her history. To them, she was just Claire Parker, the brilliant analyst Caldwell had recommended. Her first assignment was a mixed-use development in Lawrenceville. Claire dove into the work with an intensity that surprised her colleagues, building models that factored in variables they hadn't considered, asking questions that exposed hidden risks, pushing back on assumptions that didn't hold up under scrutiny. After 2 weeks, Marcus called her into his office. "The partners want to give you equity," he said. "Stock options, vesting over 4 years. You're exceeding expectations by a substantial margin." Claire felt something unfamiliar, not just pride, but validation, the sense that she was building something sustainable, something that wouldn't collapse under pressure. But the real test came 3 months in, when Emma's school called. Her daughter had gotten in a fight, pushed a boy who'd been bullying her about being new. Nothing serious, but Claire had to leave work early to pick her up. She walked into Marcus's office, explained the situation, braced for disappointment or judgment. Instead, he smiled. "Go, take care of your kid. That's more important. I'll make up the hours. Claire, you work 60 hours a week. You don't need to make up anything. Go be a mom." She picked up Emma, took her for ice cream, talked about the fight and bullying and how to handle conflict without violence. They sat in the car for an hour, just talking, and Claire realized something fundamental. She didn't have to choose between being a good mother and being a good analyst. She could be both. It was hard, required constant balancing, meant sacrifices on both sides. But it was possible. That evening, she called her mother. Her father was stable at the facility, the care was good, and Patricia sounded less stressed than she had in months. "The extra money you're sending is making all the difference," her mother said. "I can't thank you enough." "You don't have to thank me, Mom. He's my father, too." After hanging up, Claire opened her laptop and found an email from Richard Caldwell. Heard through the grapevine that you're doing exceptional work in Pittsburgh. Not surprised. Proud of you. She smiled and typed a response. Thank you. For the opportunity, for the push, for believing I could do this. It mattered. The cursor blinked at the end of the message. Claire hesitated, then added, I'm learning that it's possible to start over. Not to erase what happened, but to build something new from the pieces. I didn't think that was possible, but maybe it is. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. That night, after Emma was asleep, Claire stood at the window of their new apartment and looked out at Pittsburgh's skyline. The city glittered in the darkness, not Boston, not New York, but something different, something she was building for herself. She thought about the man who dumped change on the table at Mel's diner, testing her like she was a performing animal. She thought about the speed with which her hands had moved, sorting coins with a precision that had shocked him. She thought about all the moments since then, the consulting work, the hard decisions, the nights spent modeling risk while her daughter slept. And she thought about the future. Not the guaranteed, mapped-out future she'd imagined at 22, but something messier and more real. Emma growing up in a city with good schools and opportunities. Claire building a career that used her mind without consuming her soul. Both of them healing from the past, growing into new versions of themselves. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be bad days, financial struggles, moments of doubt and fear. Claire knew that. She'd learned the hard way that intelligence and education couldn't protect you from disaster, that success was fragile and could vanish overnight. But she'd also learned something else. You could survive the disaster. You could count the change, sort the pieces, build something new from the wreckage. You could start over. Not perfectly, not without scars, but enough. Claire stepped back from the window and closed the curtains. Tomorrow she had a presentation for the partners about a development project in the North Side. Tonight she needed sleep. She checked on Emma one last time, her daughter sleeping peacefully, clutching the stuffed rabbit that had survived 3 moves and a lifetime of changes. Then Claire went to bed, and for the first time in years she fell asleep without worrying about the morning. The change had been counted. The future was uncertain but possible, and that, finally, was enough.